In any case, oh, so thank you all for being here today. We will continue letting people in from the waiting room as they arrive. Now, before we get started, I wanted to let you know that this program is being offered in English and Spanish with simultaneous interpretation. So first of all, I would like to introduce our translator, Luis Lopez, who will explain how to use this feature. Luis.
Good afternoon, everyone. Buenas tardes. Glad to be here with you. Today, we will be using the Zoom interpretation function, which will pop up among the icons at the bottom of your screen. As soon as I'm done giving the explanation, you should see, if you're connected via computer, you should see a globe icon showing up along the bottom of your screen where you have your microphone muting icon and your camera icon, etc., all the way on the right. And that's for language interpretation. You click on it and select English as your chosen language. And then, that's everyone's going to be speaking in English during this session, correct? Right, so please disregard that. We're just going to be interpreting into Spanish. Thank you. Buenas tardes, soy Luis, su intérprete para esta sesión. Gracias por acompañarnos. Cuando termine de dar la explicación, vamos a activar el módulo de interpretación y será, si están conectados por computadora, será un icono de un globito que aparecerá en la base de su pantalla. Cuando pinchen ahí con su flechita, pueden elegir español como su idioma y de ahí en adelante ya escucharán simultáneamente mientras las personas hablen en inglés, yo estaré traduciéndoles al español al mismo tiempo. Si alguien cambia al español, lo irán directamente del grupo principal, no tienen que tocar ningún botón más. Si conectaron por teléfono, pueden usar la misma función tocando en los 3 puntitos de la esquina de su pantalla donde pone más o more, y ahí verán que tienen la opción de interpretación de idiomas, language interpretation, selección en español, y luego le aprietan en finalizar o done, y ya de ahí funcionará igual. Si tienen algún problema, por favor envíen un mensaje por el chat a Olivia y les podemos resolver. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luis. And once again, everybody, welcome to the Migrant Experience, Stories and Support. Please note that your microphones have been muted upon entry, though you can control your video camera. You can also use the live transcript closed captioning option in English only. That's at the bottom of your screen, and that's provided through AI by Zoom. Should you have any questions, comments, or concerns, we encourage you, please, to type them in the chat throughout the course of the conversation. And we will be checking the chat periodically as different topics are covered. So please do that as things occur to you. My name is Sarah Linda Lichtblau. I'm Director of Education at the Hudson River Museum. And I thank you for joining us today for this culminating panel inspired by the exhibition Border Cantos, Sonic Border on view at the Hudson River Museum through May 9th, thanks to the gracious and generous support provided by Art Bridges. While the border wall is thousands of miles away, its impact is felt in our local communities. 4 special guests will share their personal stories and invite audience discussion about migration and the legal services that address and facilitate action, amelioration, advocacy, and alliances. We are joined today by former DACA recipient Diana Sanchez, community organizer and co-founder of the Yonkers Sanctuary Movement, Neighbors Link volunteer Susan Weissert, who has worked as a translator at hearings for undocumented migrants and detainees, Luis Leon, lead immigration attorney with Make the Road, and Karin Anderson Ponzer, PhD, Director of Legal Services for Neighbors Link Community Law Practice, for this timely, powerful, and moving conversation about evolving immigration issues, moderated by Carola Bracco, Executive Director of Neighbors Link. And now it is my honor to introduce our moderator, Carola Bracco. Carola Otero Bracco executive director of Neighbors Link, has a strong personal connection to the Neighbors Link mission of strengthening the whole community through the healthy integration of immigrants. As a first-generation American born of immigrant parents from Bolivia, Carola understands the challenges that accompany the immigrant experience in America and is dedicated to inspiring healthy integration in the community. Carola is bilingual and bicultural and is driven by her passion for empowering immigrant families and advocating for personal growth through education and economic development. As a matter of fact, during Carola's tenure, Neighbors Link has become a leader in designing, implementing, and directing community-based bilingual educational and cultural awareness training programs. Furthermore, with her guidance and leadership, the organization has quadrupled in size in 10 years and is strategically scaling the Neighbors Link model in communities that are ready to embrace its mission. Before becoming executive director of Neighbors Link in April of 2004, Carola spent 12 years of her career gaining experience in financial management with such companies as General Electric and the Ford Motor Company. She holds an MBA from Duke University and currently serves on boards of organizations such as the National Council for Workforce Education and nonprofit Westchester, as well as New York Immigration Coalition. Carola is recognized as an expert on immigration issues in the New York metropolitan area, and she has received numerous awards and recognitions. Most recently, she received the Champion for Children Award from the Child Care Council of Westchester and was selected as the New York Senate District 40 Woman of Distinction for 2019. Providing leadership and vision for Neighbors Link is something Carola sees as her life's work, and she often says it is a privilege to be in her position as executive director. And now, once again, it is my privilege to introduce Carola, who will tell us a little bit about our distinguished panelists. Carola.
Thank you very much for that very generous introduction, and welcome everyone. It's really terrific to be able to spend the next hour with all of you talking about some very significant issues that go on in our border and as it relates to immigration. Let me also start by letting you know that you can feel free to put your questions in the chat, and I will be working hard to incorporate your questions into the questions that I will be asking our panelists. And I'll ask Sarah Linda to help me with that. So please, Sarah Linda, join in the conversation when you see that there's a question that's pertinent that I might not be getting to. So let me start first introducing our pretty impressive panelists. I'm going to start first with Karin Anderson Ponzer, who is the director of Neighbors Link Community Law Practice, where she leads a large and growing team of a large and growing legal team, as well as about a dozen volunteers who provide immigration legal services, community education on immigration law, and policy advocacy. In 2020, the Neighbors Link Community Law Practice handled over 500 immigration legal matters, ranging from applications for work permits to green cards and U.S. citizenship for work and to asylums. Also removal defense and detained cases, and over 9,000 individuals gained critical legal information in live and online workshops. Karin earned her law degree from the University of Baltimore School of Law and a PhD in politics and historical studies from the Immigrant Advocates Response Collaborative. She is also part of the Immigrant Response Collaborative. She is a member of the Immigrant Lawyers Association and the Westchester Women's Bar Association. Karin, along with others at Neighbors Link, has been responsible for Neighbors Link's leadership role in the passage of driver's licenses for all New Yorkers, the Immigrant Protection Act, the Fund for Excluded Workers, and wage theft legislation to protect workers. Next, it's my privilege to introduce to all of you Susan Weissert. She is a bilingual volunteer interpreter and translator with Neighbors Link. For the past 4 years, she has assisted clients through her work with the community law practice, every step of the process in seeking asylum and other forms of humanitarian relief. She's also accompanied clients to their immigration court hearings. In 2019, Susan received the Neighbors Link Volunteer of the Year Award. Susan brings years of experience working with grassroots communities throughout Latin America, working with Maryknoll, and she's also worked in the South Bronx. And I'm thrilled to introduce to all of you Diana Sanchez, who is originally from Pueblo, Mexico. She came to the United States at age 4, where she attended school in Portchester and in the Yonkers public school system. She started advocating for the community at a young age. As a young teenager, she spoke out against Yonkers public school budget cuts. And growing up, she participated in rallies and marches and fearlessly gave speeches to large crowds in support of immigration reform. Diana is relentless in her advocacy work, and she is one of the founders of the Yonkers Sanctuary Movement. She is a board member of the Hudson Valley Community Coalition and has completed a fellowship with United We Dream. Diana's impressive work focuses on deportation defense and advocating for pro-immigrant legislation for undocumented community members. And our last panelist is Luis Leon, who serves as a lead immigration attorney with Make the Road New York, where he began his work as the recipient of the prestigious and highly competitive Westchester County Bar Foundation Public Interest Fellowship. Luis received a BA from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and his law degree is from the Elizabeth Hobbs School of Law at Pace University. While studying for his JD, he worked at the Town of Greenburgh Justice Court, the Queens District Attorney's Office, and the Immigration Justice Clinic at John Jay Legal Services, run by Professor Vanessa Merton. So thank you to our panelists for joining us. I'm going to start, Karin, with you by asking you to please talk to us a little bit about the wall, the border. Give us some context of history of how this came to be in this country. Please go ahead, Karin.
Great. So it's important, after experiencing the past few years where we saw the last administration try and create this wall, this fixed place where the border was, it's important to remember that the border is not fixed. It's a contested space. It's changed over time, and it's the product of forces that can be changed and can move and evolve. I want to focus just on 4 notes. First, the location of the border has changed. Over the history of the United States, the place that's the US-Mexico border now used to be part of Mexico. It used to be within Mexico, and it was only as a result of the expansion of the United States that we have the US-American border that we have today. The border is also the product of racism and white supremacy. As Mexico was abolishing slavery in 1830, it was the same period of time shortly thereafter that Texas entered the United States, previously US territory, as a slave state. So as the US-Mexico border at its early stages was policed by individuals trying to maintain a racialized sense of who belonged where. First, there was enslaved folks who were in the United States and would try to leave to freedom in Mexico. Officials and non-official groups tried to keep those people in, while at the same time keeping Mexican citizens and Native Americans who had been living on Mexican territory, repressing them and pushing them out. At the same time, too, the first US immigration laws for passing to exclude Chinese immigrants who, when they were unable to enter the ports of entry, would try and cross at the US-Mexico border. So from this sort of racial hierarchy and the border became a place where these sorts of hierarchies were enforced in often very repressive and brutal ways. The border is also a place that's been shaped by economic a demand for labor in the United States that resulted in formal programs like the Bracero program during World War II, where Mexican citizens were recruited to come to this country and work. And then unfortunately, and unfairly pushed out thereafter. And the long history of accepting, up until recently, of basically having market forces encourage individuals to come to this country. Last but not least, it's important to remember in the context of the folks that are surging at the border now, the role of the United States and American foreign policy in police using deportation as a law enforcement mechanism in this country. That part of the reason Central American countries are destabilized now is because of a long history of civil war in the latter half of the 20th century. And the ways in which then the gangs that were initially created in the 1980s in the United States of folks who were migrants from Central America, when law enforcement in the United States dealt with that problem of gang violence in California and other places by deporting those individuals, they deported marginalized people who are engaged in illegality into countries that were already destabilized through many years of civil war. And that is creating the problems that we have now in this increasingly policed environment on the border. We have a contested space, and that's been repressive historically, and it continues to be this very politicized space. And people need to understand the broad sweep of history that shapes the border problems and challenges that are impacting people's lives now.
So thanks for that, Karin. That really helps us understand, I think, why we are where we are today. Can you talk a little bit about what happens when people arrive at the border and how they're processed through? What does a person typically find when they come to the border?
Well, that's a great question. And the complexity of that, I think, is highlighted by one of the many families that we work with. So for example, if a child comes to the border and they're unaccompanied, as we know over the past few years, the way they're treated can change depending on who's in the White House, but a child will go through a practice of being housed in a facility that's governed by the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and there'll be an effort to reunite them with a family. With the case that we handled, I was representing a mother who'd been previously ordered deported. She came to the United States, was admitted, but then she had to fight her deportation from in the United States. At the same time, when her minor child came later, she was trying to reunite with that child. Then a person who enters the United States with the child hopefully will not be separated, but they may be. So there's all the challenges relating to the family separation, people losing track of each other. You can have adult children who face detention. This is what happened to my client. She's in the United States. Her minor children are released to her. Her son, who happened to turn 18, was detained and deported back to his country, where he is still in danger. So there's some people, if they're lucky, will actually get to immigration court or to an asylum interview. But in the meantime, they have to deal with the challenges of family separation and the concerns about loved ones who may not even be able to get out of deportation to really fight their case.
Thank you for that, Karin. And so that leads us into, Diana, this makes me understand even better why you and your organization are doing the work you're doing. Could you talk to us a little bit about what inspired you to start your work of working with immigrants in this country?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Oh, I hear myself echoing. I'm sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Diana. I'm one of the co-founders of Yonker Sanctuary Movement. We are a grassroots organization. This year, we're going to be celebrating our 5th anniversary. I think the reason we started to do this work, it started in December of 2016 with the new administration. We were worried for our community, especially because we know that the state of New York wasn't a sanctuary, and neither was our city. So when we started, the reason we're called Yonker Sanctuary Movement was because we were pushing for Yonkers, the city of Yonkers, to become a sanctuary space. Many of the people who co-founded this organization were directly impacted DACA recipients and had parents as well as community members and family members who were completely undocumented. Through our work, what we've seen, we've dealt with all parts of immigration too. One thing that we have been strongly advocating is for the detentions and separations from our community members. We have fought for cases. One big case that is known throughout time has been my dad. We're still fighting it. 2 times he's been in deportation proceedings. The last time he was by Louisiana, right? And while we do that case, deportation cases, we also get cases with the border. 2 years ago, we had a community member who reached out from the Bronx, and one of her daughters was actually in the border. She was an unaccompanied minor. Unfortunately, the way that's happening in the border is once they detain a person, they like to transfer them all around different parts. One of the states is Louisiana, right? They usually do these private prisons where they're literally like try to put as many people as far away, where there's no transportation, there's no way of connecting with any help, you know, and it's through other organizations besides Yonker Sanctuary Movement that we are able to help out. I think we have one of our viewers, she might be from our group. Judy is an amazing advocate. She's one of our board members, and the amazing work just connecting with other organizations who are doing deportation defense, it's so important. And that's honestly, personally, it has affected me, many of our community members, also many of our board members, because we had to deal with the immigration system failing us as we also advocate.
And Diana, you talked about people in detention being moved around. Can you give us a sense of why that happens, why they get moved around from detention center to detention center?
It's a process, and I feel, for instance, when my dad got detained in Albany, he got detained for driving without a license, right? We're going before green light even happened. So he was originally detained in Albany. From Albany, he got moved to Buffalo to serve time because with the former administration, just to give you a little bit of info, with the former administration, when a person did entry, it was already bad, but when they did reentry, they were charging reentry for like a state crime. So now they have to do up to 6 months behind a facility. For people who don't know what reentry means, whenever you cross the border, you get stopped by Department of Homeland Security. They stop you. That's one entry, right? You go into their system. Basically, as soon as you are in contact with an immigration officer, you have a case. Your case starts. They fingerprint you. They give you an A number, right? So when they send you back to your country, they deport you, and then you come back and you get stopped again, that's a reentry. With my dad's case, multiple reentries, because he had multiple reentries in 2001. He now now as a 50-plus-year-old person who was detained for the purpose of not driving with a license, now because they're connected, since ICE and also the police work together, they connected. So they charged him as a federal crime. So 6 months he went to Buffalo, and then after Buffalo, he actually got moved to another detention center in upstate. And finally, he was brought down to the Brooklyn Detention Center, which is an immigration detention for deportation. Honestly, the reason I feel like they moved them around, it's many reasons. One of them is for him not to have support and have connections with his family or have connections with attorney. The other one, every time you transfer a person from one jail to another, there's money going into it, and people don't know that. It costs them it costs them hundreds of dollars to move people around. So let's say for one day, we're seeing that they're costing around 100 to 175 just to maintain one person inside detention centers. So now imagine when they have to move, they have to pay for an airfare. You're going to be paying a private airfare, right? You're going to be making those connections with that private company. Then you're going to be moving them around. You have to pay more officials, like their work and extra hours. Like I said, this is a money making machine where basically ICE has separated so many community members and have made profits. We have to look at also how much money they're making with the calls. For $15, literally that a family member puts in for credit, it'll take like 5 to 10 minutes. You'll waste the $15 you put for basically a phone card. Then you also have to acknowledge that they're using a specific pair of sneakers, even sneakers clothing, right? There's certain brands. Everything is privatized. And basically the people who end up making money are these private corporations. And unfortunately, when we think of the border, another case that we had this young lady who came, if I'm not mistaken, from Honduras. Her mom reached out. She was in Louisiana. She first was in Arizona. I don't remember if it was in Arizona or in California. Then she got moved to Louisiana. Then from Louisiana, they were actually hit her court case in Puerto Rico. So now we had to find an attorney that not only, was working in Louisiana, but was also working in Puerto Rico. If it wasn't for us, honestly, she probably would have gotten deported. Thank goodness for the attorneys that we connected. They connected with another attorney. One thing that we ended up doing, because it's not just the attorneys, we have to pay for attorneys. And when you do private attorneys, which are usually when you have a case like that they're in like immediate deportation proceedings, you need to hire an actual private attorney so they can move fast. So you're looking between 5 to 10 grand in just an immigration attorney. Then if there's a possibility they get bail, they range. The cheapest bail that we've seen has been 5,000, and the most has been 20,000 as of now. And we heard it goes even more up. So now imagine not only getting money for an attorney, getting money, if that person makes bail, you have to pay bail. And and then continue these proceedings, because even when they're outside, they're still going to be monitored and checking in with them.
And Diana, can you just share with us also a little bit about your experience your own personal experience as a DACA recipient?
Yeah, I mean, recently I had an interview with a reporter who had come up with DACA when we were fighting DACA. And like I said, she was trying to get me to say negative things about people crossing inside the new juveniles. And I was like, no, like I can't do that. Like, first of all, if I would have been crossing at this time, I would be one of those children inside those cages, right? Because I did cross when I was 5, and I met my parents here, and I crossed with family members, which now it's another problem, because if you cross with a minor, they're charging the adult for committing a crime. So most likely, if you don't have an attorney, that person, the adult, is going to be sent back, and also is going to have a criminal history. And that's the thing. Like when I crossed with my uncle, with this also couple that were pretending to be my parents. And I think that, like for everyone who helped me through the whole process, I remember everything, and like I said, going into houses that I didn't know, like who were the people, the owners. I thought maybe they were my parents. Every family I met, I thought it was my parents, which is kind of funny in a way, because I was like, are you my mom? I feel like I'm like that bird from Dr. Seuss, like, are you my mom? so it's great. I laugh at it, but at the same time, it's like, it's sad, because you're here trying to meet your parents. And when you finally meet your parents, you come into a place where you feel distrust, because you never seen them. You've spoken to them by phone, but you never seen them. And then it's hard, because the adaptation, I'm sorry, I get emotional, the adaptation of a child that has been with their family and their country, and come and be put into another place with basically they're your family, but they're also unknown to you. it takes a toll on the child's social development. So now I can't even imagine how the children who are crossing, that they're put in cages where they can't even get a hug, they can't get anything, like any human proper touch and feeling. Like I can't even imagine that, because I remember as a child, even sleeping in the night, I would cry myself to sleep because I wanted to be back with my grandparents, right? So for me, like, I seen how it affected that as a child. I seen how my grandfather, who I never met, was a bracero, and the way he got treated and how mentally ill a lot of his family and himself had to deal with. And I seen my dad, when being deported, and my two brothers going through deportation process. I've seen how it has affected us. That in a family of 6, like half of like my family has gone through incarceration, deportation, and it's heartbreaking, but at the same time it pushes me and encourages me to continue pushing. And like I said, I wouldn't be doing this honestly if it wasn't for the support of the rest of our board members and the rest of the groups who the persons who volunteer in Yonker Sanctuary Movement. So I am blessed, honestly, and it's important because as a grassroots, what you're trying to create is also leadership from directly impacted. I've always said that directly impacted the community know the solution to the problems. We just have to learn how to let them lead, listen to them, and support them as much as they can.
Diana, I can really hear the courage in your voice and the conviction to really make a difference. So your work is so critical. It does lead me to ask Luis, could you talk to us a little bit about the work that Make the Road did as it relates to the Supreme Court decision related to DACA? I think that feeds right into what Diana's life experiences. Could you talk about that, Luis?
Sure, absolutely. And I would like to start off with saying thank you to Diana for sharing your story. Very courageous, and I just want to shed light on like the different services that organization and nonprofits around the work that we do kind of provide this essential services to these folks that are the family separation, the loss of income, all these kind of things that are left behind as these folks are going through these challenging times. And I know that Neighbors Link, Make the Road, Yonker Sanctuary, and so many more here in New York, and 10 times more near the border, that they help so many of these immigrants and help them out in different kinds of ways. But as we speak about DACA recipients and the stories related to the border, one of the cases that got a lot of news last year was Martin Batalla Vidal, which is one of Make the Road's members that took his fight all the way to the Supreme Court as a DACA recipient. So Martin came to the U.S. when he was 7 years old. He lives still in Brooklyn, New York, and he was a member of Make the Road. So in 2014, he applied for DACA, and in the early months of 2015 was given a 3-year work permit. His DACA was approved. So he was very excited. He was finally able to have some kind of status in this country. He has a work permit at this point, and he has a social security number. But in that same year, in 2014, President Obama announced that he was going to do an extension of DACA and also implement a new program, DAPA, which is going to be for the parents of legal permanent residents or Americans. It never came into fruition, so we don't know what that was actually going to be like. But Texas and 25 other states challenged the constitutionality of this program and was able to get an injunction. So DAPA was canceled. There was an injunction on it, and Martin got a letter from USCIS, which is U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services, that his 3-year work permit was now going to be a 2-year work permit. And with the help of Make the Road and the National Immigration Law Center and the Yale Law School Clinic, they were able to find and obtain counsel for Martin, and he sued the Department of Homeland Security, challenging that this injunction that was in the Fifth Circuit, which is not in New York, was violating his constitutional rights. So he was able to get it introduced, or he brought this suit in the Eastern District Court of New York, and he was eventually able to get an injunction from a district court judge, and as well there was another injunction in California, another injunction in DC, and by the time the court was this case was still pending, our last president, Donald Trump, was able to actually come into office and actually rescind DACA. So this is now 2017. He has rescinded DACA. He gave Congress 6 months to move forward and kind of come up with a plan to give legal pathway to all our DACA folks. And it never happened, right? So the government appealed the injunction in the Eastern District Court, and it ended up going all the way up to the Supreme Court. And Martin was at every single hearing. He was like this very shy kid, and over the years, he turned into a man, and he was going out in front of tens of thousands of people and supporting immigrants, telling them to speak up. He was writing co-ops for national, papers all over the country. And then last year in June, we finally got, a victory at the Supreme Court, and they said that the way that Donald Trump had implemented or rescinded DACA was unconstitutional. It went against the APA and the due process rights under the Fifth Amendment. And after even court orders, after that, they made the DACA program go back to where it was before 2017. So that just gives one story of the many of these DACA recipients. And even now, with the pandemic of last year, we've had all of our DACA folks have been in the front lines, essential workers, lawyers, doctors. They're in every single field, and they're brave, and they make a stand for all of our immigrants.
So thanks for that, Luis. And important to note that the Supreme Court decision didn't say that DACA was an invalid program. All they said was the way that Donald Trump had attempted to eliminate the program was unconstitutional. And in fact, the Supreme Court almost even gave a roadmap of how to get rid of DACA if that's what the administration would have wanted to do. Can you give us a good sense of where does DACA stand now, about how many people benefit from DACA? Could you give us an idea of that, Luis, please?
Sure. Yeah, you said it right at the point that the Supreme Court actually laid it out for President Trump to actually legally rescind DACA. And thank God that he didn't win office again, because that was the number one priority, I think, on his list. Excuse me, was to rescind DACA again legally. And so right now, the current status of DACA is that it went back to its prior state from 2017. So USCIS again is starting to accept new applications. They're accepting applications for advanced parole as well, which is permission to travel abroad, but there has to be humanitarian reasons for it, which can help in the later stages of DACA folks that want to adjust their status and become green card holders by another via, since they can get now a legal admission to the country. But other legislation, the American Dream and Promise Act of 2021 has been proposed. It has passed the House. This piece of legislation creates a pathway for citizenship for DACA folks, for people that have TPS, and deferred enforcement departure holders as well. So it's estimated that 3.1 million undocumented immigrants will benefit from this if it becomes law. In the House, this legislation got support of only 9 Republican representatives. So right now it has to pass the Senate. And I think that's going to be very difficult to get the support that it needs from the representative Republican side of the Senate. But in terms of how many folks are benefiting from DACA right now, I think numbers came out that early, I think it was like last month, and we said it's around 640,000 individuals that have applied or are benefiting right now from DACA. And again, these folks have 2-year work permits or security. They have deferred action, which means that they will not be at risk of deportation because the government is allowing them to remain in the country, just not give them any legal status.
Thank you so much, Luis, for that information. And important to understand also that there are probably about 1.2 million people in this country that would actually qualify for DACA, but many are afraid to apply. So the number that you stated of the people that have applied is still far below the number of people that would qualify just even under the prior administration. So thanks for that, Luis. Now, Susan, take us please to some of the work that you've been doing with people who have experienced the border, and share with us some of the stories that you've heard and what you've experienced. You're on mute, Susan.
Sorry. Thanks, Carola. Yes, and it's a privilege to be here, and it's a privilege to be able to both interpret and translate for the clients that we see at Neighbors Link. I wanted to just say, for one thing, Diana, I think really gave us a sense of a lot of the same kinds of situations that our clients live with, have lived with, and continue to carry with them, and as they face their court or their immigration hearings, this journey. I, as an interpreter, I listen. I affirm what I'm hearing. I acknowledge the validity of what people are telling us, and I get to validate that for them. I think one of the things that we don't think about is that people's voice has not been heard, hasn't been respected, and we can provide a safe place for them to tell their stories so that we can support this journey toward whatever kind of relief we can help them obtain. I occasionally go to an immigration hearing where the person's first hearing with an immigration official, which can be a bit of a scary place to be. My very first client was a young woman, an unaccompanied child. She was escaping physical and sexual abuse from her boyfriend, who was older than she. She was only 14. The family couldn't help her. The police were of no help at all. And after several months, she decided she had to leave and left at the age of 15. She was raped in Mexico during that journey and didn't find out she was pregnant until she was in detention on the US side of the border. I met her, when I met her, her son was 1 year old, and turned out her first language was not Spanish, but Mom, another Guatemalan language. And so today she is dominated both Spanish and is getting her English, and Karin and I stay in touch with her. We have visited her in the residential place that she was living in, and continue to stay in touch with her because her case is still pending, still in process. I interpret in client attorney interviews, helping prepare their statements and their affidavits, doing follow-up calls, interviews. We have done interviews with persons who are detained all across the country. So that's done with a screen. Sometimes the connection isn't good, or we have to remake the appointments. It's frustrating for the client, and you're still at the same time attempting to interpret very, very completely what you are hearing that client tell you on a number of levels. I've accompanied clients to court. Sometimes it's just a bit a way to support them. I am not a court interpreter. That's a very different item. A court interpreter is a conduit, as Luis could tell us. It is very strict. It is exactly what you hear. It goes back and forth, and there is no leeway for a client. Whereas we have the ability to say to a client, take it easy. We know this is hard. Here's the Kleenex, have a glass of water, take a breath. We can come back to that. Would you like to say that a different way? Can you give me more details? It's it's a good place for solid work, but it's also crucial to the client's both self-esteem and lowering fear as well as toward their case. There may be more. I'll do just about anything our team asks.
Susan, thank you for that and for sharing your work. It does, we're certainly getting a sense of the tremendous amount of trauma that is experienced by the communities that we all serve as they deal with their experience of having crossed the border. And so I can see that this is a big challenge. I would imagine that the pandemic has really exacerbated people's ability to share their story. Can you just briefly comment on that as well?
Sure, yes, it has. Beginning with the fact that they have been impacted by lack of loss of work, children being home, inability to go out and shop, or having to go to work, jeopardizing the health of their own health and their families. So on top of that, if we're in the middle of a case and we need to interview that person, we can't have, for months, we couldn't have anybody come into the office. So what was before a face-to-face interview or session, now you might do it on the telephone, where you have to make certain the person has a place where they can talk to you, where the connection will be good, which isn't always the case. And is there a safe place for the person to talk? For example, I had a client about a week ago whose husband actually did not know some of her story. And it was quite legitimate that he didn't, but she had no place to talk to me on the phone except at home. And so we had to find a time that worked for her. Or sometimes people will talk to you on their break at work. And so you always want to make sure, now, is this a safe place for you to talk? Can you actually tell me? Or do we find another time? You call me at 9 o'clock at night. You really have to, it's just a big difference. It's also an issue for getting papers signed. Sometimes I'm the person who ends up going and saying, can you sign these documents for us? And so we've done that in the parking lot or on the hood of the car, but masked. Yeah, it is different.
Thank you, Susan. And I am seeing a few questions in the chat, so I thought I might ask you, Luis, to answer. One of the questions in the chat is, do DACA protections confer any rights to DACA recipients' family members at this point? Are you able to answer that question, Luis?
Sure. At this point, DACA is only given to the individual. The parents or sister, siblings, children don't have any benefit from DACA. There's no derivative benefit that you can obtain from it, unfortunately.
Okay, so thanks for that. And I do see another question here that says, maybe Karin, you can tell us, so the court's mandated to provide interpretation in a client's language?
They are, but that doesn't mean it happens. So, and this is a very big issue, and because I saw another question in the chat about this, there's been a couple, and it is so, and this is a really important question, a great point, that it's often the case that you'll have an interpreter who will say they're competent in a language. This happens in immigration court all the time. Think about, forget even the complexity of an indigenous language, but the variety of Spanish that is spoken, just like the variety of English. You can't make an assumption that one person speaking Spanish can communicate accurately or effectively what your client is saying. I'm speaking of this from an attorney's perspective. So it's so important. And this gets to the importance of attorneys, but also volunteers or anybody who advocates, as Diana was saying, for individuals going through this process, because it's so important that a person who's in a courtroom setting or another setting where there's an official government provided interpreter to speak up, to say, I don't understand this person, because there's huge problems with dialect. I've seen many times where people's cases were negatively impacted because they tried to be a good sport and just go with the interpreter that was made available to them. And it's even more so if you have a client with an indigenous language or a language other than Spanish in this case, it's really important because a government official who's pressed for time or just it's not necessarily, friendly to your client or, your life. If you're the person who's doing the talking about your own life, they're not going to be necessarily friendly to you. It's super important that people are empowered to speak up and say, I don't understand this, and say, this cannot go forward until everybody understands what's being said. And that goes to, I know another person had mentioned the importance of interpreting everything that happens in an interview. Often these official interpreters will just interpret the questions that the judge and the lawyers say, but the person needs to know everything that's being said. And so somebody like Susan, for example, has been invaluable in these official interview settings to help explain to the client, particularly since she often knows them so well and they trust her, really explain everything that's happening. This is the biggest experience of somebody's life at times, these big hearings. And they need to understand everything, and they have a right to understand everything and to be communicated to in the language they understand.
Thanks for that, Karin. And yes, Diana, please.
Yeah, so just to give you an example how the court happens, when I went to Federal Plaza for my dad's interview, he didn't have an interpreter. So when we were doing that, like we saw how the judge and like the person representing basically immigration and then the attorney, they were going back and forth. And also another thing is like the inhumane treatment that they get, because they'll start like, usually what immigration is trying to do is make the person of the opposite side look really bad. So they'll start using languages like that really humiliates the person, right? And dehumanizes. And as a family member, I was watching and I had to like stay quiet, right? As an advocate, I was like so upset. But this is the reality, like, having people also in court with the family to like see the whole process and know the process too, because sometimes the family will go, but they too don't know what their family member is going through, what they're talking about too. And then another thing I did want to bring out is just like the whole translation things, even documents, getting documentation being sent to an inmate to fill it out. That's another big issue too. In many of these centers, if there's a person inside there, if they're nice to you, they'll help you out. But if they're not going to go out of their way to try to get the paperwork to be filled out or anything to be filled out. So I just wanted to bring that a little bit back.
Gracias, Diana. And so could we also just talk I see we just have a few more minutes left. I would really like to be able to ask you, Karin and Luis, maybe, could you both talk a little bit about what we're seeing at the border today, more from a policy and a legal perspective? If you could talk about the refugees that we're seeing, how they're trying to come into the border, and what our current asylum policies are looking like. And I'll ask you to do that in about three minutes. Karin, you're on mute.
So Luis, maybe I'll talk about what's happening with the continued enforcement, and you could talk about what's happening with asylum, or we can just we can jump back and forth. I just wanted to raise something that I've seen confusion about recently, which is what we're seeing reported is that the number of deportations continue to be very high under this administration. And what that is an artifact of is, notwithstanding the current administration's efforts to let process people, eliminate MPP, there is still, the administration still hasn't rescinded something called the Title 42 expulsion program. And this is not an immigration provision. It's a provision that empowers the head of the Center for the CDC to bar the entry of people into the United States when they come from a country where there is a communicable disease. This has been used to bar entry of folks into the United States from countries during the coronavirus pandemic. But what's happening now is we're seeing that being used in a very overbroad fashion to summarily push people back over the border, and that's continuing at a very high rate. So combined removals and using the Title 42, there's apparently about 300,000 people who've been deported or removed, whether it's under some provision of immigration law or Title 42. So, but Luis, I don't know if you want to talk about the elimination of MPP, what that means.
Yeah, so the migrant protocols that were basically the Remain in Mexico laws that the Trump administration had placed was that anyone that was presenting themselves at the border had to remain in Mexico until they could process their case in front of a judge, right? So that was just rescinded, but there's still up, they say about 25,000 people still stuck in like Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, that haven't been processed or don't know what's going on with their cases. At some point, they would have to get their cases transferred to whatever state they would have to come in on. So a lot has changed, but in terms of law, but a lot of the procedural things have kind of remained the same because the folks are still stuck at the border and haven't been able to come in.
Yeah, the one thing we're seeing more of too, I'd say, we're not seeing MPP arrivals. What I've heard is that a lot of the folks that we represent are from the Central American countries, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And what I've heard is some speculation that and people from those countries in the MPP program were more likely to have already been ordered deported while in Mexico. So we may see fewer of those arrivals. I don't know. I think that's still speculative. We are seeing unaccompanied, I'm sure people have heard in the news about the unaccompanied minors who were at first still being detained far too long and now are being processed more quickly. We're starting to see those children arrive in the area. We're getting calls from family members who are trying to do the paperwork to get those children released from federal custody and into their care.
And Karin, in those cases, are you seeing, are families afraid to ever step forward to claim custody for the children that they may know, or are they fearful of retaliation?
You know, that's a great, under the last administration, there was definitely open threats to that those people would be targeted. That is not the case under the current administration, and whether it was the last administration or this one, people are always desperate to get to their children. They're not letting anything stop them. I do think one concern that we have going forward is that you have people who their children are in danger. They need their children need to get into this country to safety, and they need to be reunited with their families. And I think we've been concerned that at some point, the fact that the parents are taking the children and they came to the country could be held against the parents under some smuggling provision, because you're not supposed to facilitate the entry of people into the United States. But these parents, their kids, like what could be a better test? What the test of being a good parent, right? That you're going to get your child to safety no matter what. Am I going to let a federal law keep me from protecting my son? No, like I'm going to protect my child. So people should be penalized if they're trying to reunite with their children in safety.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And Diana, I'd love to give you the last word.
Yeah, two things. I do know currently some family members are still worried about that because they reached out to us. So when we do that, we try to connect them with other families who have gone through the process so they know that there's nothing to fear. Another thing that I wanted to bring up about the court systems, talking with my attorneys, that he started to tell me how the people representing ICE, basically the prosecutors, they all of them are going in aspiration to become judge. So the more cases they have in denial, it's better, and it looks like they have a better, record. So that we have to take in consideration when we're dealing with cases. That ultimately, what the people representing ICE, what they're trying to do is prosecute and to get, basically the community member or the inmate to potentially be deported. That's their goal, you know. And yeah, lastly, you know, yeah, I wanted to touch basically on those two. I forgot the third one. Sorry, Carola.
No, está bien. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to our panelists, Susan, Karin, Luis, and Diana. I thank you for the work that you do, for the courage, the resilience that you have in doing that work, and certainly for your conviction. Really, I think you make Westchester and the families in Westchester much stronger. And a special thanks also to the Hudson River Museum for putting together a very special, moving, compelling exhibit that has really generated a tremendous amount of conversation. And I think we're all so much better informed because of this exhibit. So thank you to you, Sarah Linda, and to Olivia for your work. And also thanks to our interpreter, Luis, for helping us throughout this. Sarah Linda, would you like to close out with some reminders?
I would love to. Thank you so much, Carola. And thank you so much, Diana, Karin, Susan, Luis, for what I knew was going to be, as you said, a really powerful and compelling conversation, an important one that we really needed to have and need to keep having. And you know, we are just thrilled at the Hudson River Museum at the reception that Border Canto Sonic Border has received. And in terms of really bringing people into these conversations, which we hope to continue with our community partners. And everyone in the audience, I want to say that, you know, you now have an idea of the extraordinary humanitarian legal advocacy work that these organizations do. And I also want to give a shout out to Professor Vanessa Merton for some of the wonderful background she's been giving us in the chat. Thank you, Vanessa. You know, I put a lot of links in the chat. One of them is a link to community resources that the museum has on its website. So whether you are interested in researching and finding out how you can be helped with a path to citizenship, or you know someone who needs that kind of expertise, or if you're looking for a way to help to become an advocate or an ally, I encourage you to go on that site and take a look at the organizations listed there, and you can get in touch with Neighbors Link, with Make the Road, with Yonker Sanctuary Movement, to pursue whatever path is yours in relation to these issues. Also, we hope to welcome all of you to the Hudson River Museum really soon, and hope that you all stay well and healthy. Thank you again to our panelists and to our staff for making this happen. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diana.